Welcome to Securing Your Space, Protecting Student and Personal Information. This seminar is brought to you by Student Development Associates Incorporated and was created by Dr. Carlton Smith and Ben Wentworth, PhD. My name is Ben, and I'm going to be your host as we go through this short presentation. So, a quick overview of what we're going to discuss in the next 30 minutes. First, we'll discuss some framing questions for data security and student information security. Then we're going to delve into three parts of security: data security, including encryption and passwords and anonymization; physical security, such as lock and keys and penetration testing. Then finally, we'll discuss human security, which involves phishing and social engineering techniques, and educating our human component of security. We'll conclude this with a red team, blue team activity that you can take back to your staff to practice or augment for your own work. We have three intended learning outcomes for you all tonight. First, you'll be able to create strategies for maintaining or creating a secure space. Second, you'll be able to identify security threats in your environment. And third, you'll be able to create recommendations for better security in your environment. Now, I want to point out that we only have three, but we are happy to address specific needs for your institution and your specific area if needed. A quick disclaimer though: no security plan is perfect. These guidelines and lessons can provide an additional layer of protection, but everyone should be flexible and prepared to learn new things, take additional steps, and address issues as they arise. In short, security is something that is constantly evolving, and we need to evolve with it. So, a handful of reflection questions prompted by Shu et al. 2016. What do you wish you knew about securing your data before you were tasked with doing so? Go ahead, take a moment, pause the video, and ponder that. Likewise, why is securing data important? What's the reason that we do so, and how can we make sure that we're doing so properly? Again, go ahead and take a few moments to write down or discuss among yourselves as you watch the video. Moving into our first section now: data security. Keep it secret, keep it safe, as Gandalf said. I would like to draw your attention to another XKCD cartoon here, where we discuss where the author Randall Munroe describes how people think hacking works versus how it actually works. A lot of people tend to think that hacking involves deep, carefully crafted exploits of computer code, when in actuality, it's a lot of copying and pasting to see who used the same passwords across multiple areas or who has small slips in the armor, so to say. So, in terms of encryption and passwords, encryption is the process of hiding data or obfuscating it by turning it from one thing into something else. Quite simply, it's encoded or somehow made in a way that it is difficult to decode the data without knowing what technique was used to encode it and the key to decode it. Encryption is crucial if your data is going to be stored locally, and even more so if your data is going to be transported. You want to have encryption, such as a password or some sort of encryption key, on any data that you are going to be storing and using, and that could be sensitive. And if it's going to be transported, such as on a flash drive or something like that, you especially want to encrypt the data to make sure that if you lose that physical device, it is still secure. A good rule of thumb is that passwords should be easy for people to remember and hard for computers to guess. Drawing your attention again to the XKCD comic by Randall Munroe, you notice that he describes how the Troubadour ampersand 3 is incredibly hard for people to remember, but it's so short that a computer can guess it fairly quickly. Meanwhile, the password correct horse battery staple is much more difficult for a computer to guess and is something that we can easily envision in our heads. As you're collaborating with IT, you can discuss passwords and the need for complexity and identify supported encryption software at your campus. It may be that there already is a form of encryption being used and you simply are not aware of it because it's being used so regularly and in the background that it seems to be skipped when not distressed. Also, no amount of encryption will anonymize your data or remove sensitive information. So keep that in mind. You may think, oh, I have a password on this zip file or on this PDF. That is not anonymizing the data. That is a separate process that we'll get into in a moment. Specifically, anonymization is the process of de identifying data, removing the ability to actually determine who this data came from. So, a couple of questions here that you can pause and discuss amongst yourselves. What are the pros and cons of de identifying data immediately versus creating pseudonyms later? So, for instance, if you have some data which you have already gone proactively in and made pseudonyms and are actually having recordings where people refer to themselves with those pseudonyms, what are the pros and cons of that versus creating a pseudonym after the interview or after the data is gathered? Secondly, even after anonymizing data, how can the combination of different demographic variables make an individual identifiable? As a case in point, if you're in a small master's program or a small PhD program, it may be that certain demographic combinations, such as sex, racial or ethnic identification, and gender, may be only belonging to a handful of people or even just one person. If so, including those demographics in our data gathering could out the person simply because we know they're the only person who has that particular combination of traits. Physical security. A lot of people consider physical security to be consisting primarily of locks and keys. However, I'd like to point out that locks are able to slow access, they cannot stop all access, though. Also, keys are cheap and publicly available. When you're selecting a lock or keys, you should consider it to be a deterrent, not a way to prevent access. On the screen, you'll see a handful of slides that are taken of different keys, all available on the common website Amazon.com. These include the key to my file cabinet in my office for $12, includes apartment gate keys, the door key and linear ACP keys over there on the on the right hand side. Those are able to open various apartment gates. Elevator controls at the bottom right. Jukeboxes and certain voting machines use the C415A key there in the bottom center. And various key boxes, RVs, and office cabinets use the universal replacement key set for locks down there on the bottom left. It has a brand name, but it's tucked away. Put simply, keys are not the end all for security. So, if you are protecting data and relying on locks, use 2 to 3 different brands of locks between the outside world and your data. And if possible, get a lock that is custom bitted, meaning custom made for your lock. The act of defeating keys and locks is commonly referred to as penetration. In this case, the goal is not to go through the barrier, but to get past it or around it. On the screen, you'll see 2 photos there in the center. They are both of my office door at my place of employment before an overhaul. The top one shows the actual locking mechanism and the deadbolt that could be thrown. The bottom shows the steel block which the lock actually went into. There's a couple of things I want to draw your attention to. First, we're dealing with a 7-pin lock, which means that someone using a set of lock picks is going to have a very tough time actually feeling when the lock is in position. Second, there's a dead latch there in the center of the top image. That dead latch makes it where the lock is effectively stuck in position until the key is inserted or the latch is removed, thus making it more difficult to put some sort of piece of plastic or paper in there to shim the lock. There's also a slip collar around the lock. You may be able to see the circle of steel around the keyway and around the actual locking handle. If someone were to simply say, "Oh, I'm just going to muscle through it with some pliers," they would instead just spin their pliers indefinitely as the slip collars go around. And finally, we're talking about a 3-inch thick steel block holding up the door, making it incredibly difficult to kick through. However, if you look over at the right hand side image, there's a great demonstration on YouTube by Deviant Olam, whose name is there on the screen, showing how by unraveling a coat hanger and tying a piece of string to it, he was able to slip it under the door, have the rod go up, catch the inside door handle, which is unprotected, and then use the string to pull the metal down, opening the door from the locked side. So while there's all this technology in the way to stop someone from breaking my lock, that's all useless if you're simply able to go through it and get around it from the other side. Human security. Phishing and social engineering are two topics that are very buzzwordy currently. Phishing is the legitimate looking emails being sent to fake sites to harvest login credentials or personal information. In short, you receive an email saying it's from Amazon, it's from your institution, or it's from some other area that you do business with, and it attempts to harvest your login information by appearing like the site, but not actually being the site. Social engineering is using social conventions such as being polite or being kind to gain access to spaces, information, or resources. A classic example of social engineering would be going outside of a building and smoking a cigarette and then asking someone to hold the door for you after they also finish smoking their cigarette. They presume you are in the building, and we are trained to hold the door for people as they follow us in. This is called tailgating specifically. How to avoid phishing and social engineering though? Education. Train people to be aware, cautious, and direct with folks. If people are able to give themselves permission to stand up and say, "Hey, hold on, you need to card in. You need to swipe your key before you're able to enter the building," and have that be not a rude thing to do, but just a common practice, then you can start overcoming some social engineering tactics. Also, teach folks how to identify potential phishing attacks. These could take various forms, so you're not going to be able to identify all of them, but training people to always look at links before they click on them, making sure that people know not to click on links if they look at all odd, and having a way for people to easily and readily report odd links that might be phishing attempts is important. Also, give permission to your people to challenge people and break social conventions when security is an issue. Make sure that folks feel comfortable saying, "Hey, are you allowed to be here? Hey, I don't recognize you. What are you doing here?" While certain people will take to this quicker and better than others, simply saying, "Hey, y'all are the ones who are allowed in this room with this protected data. If someone else wants in here, they need to be able to identify themselves to you," makes it where people are more likely to stand up than if you were to ignore it. Also, assess your security protocols and training. Quite simply, people don't necessarily know what best practices are until they've been taught them. So, figure out what protocols you have in place and what training you have that's supporting those protocols. And check your institution's training site or professional development site for cybersecurity training modules. There's no need for you to reinvent the wheel, especially if the wheel's already available to you from your institution. Now we'll take a little bit of time for a red team, blue team activity. What I encourage you to do is go ahead and separate, if you're in a group, into two groups. One being the red team, which is looking in this image for ways to break the security protocols and get data from me. Blue team, your job is the opposite. Find where there might be holes or flaws in security and find ways to cover them up or make it harder for someone to get through and get data that is protected. Keep in mind that as you're doing this, if you are the red team, you are allowed to think like the bad guys. You are trying to steal data from my office, shown in this image, in order to use it for your nefarious deeds. Blue team, you have to think like the bad guys too in order to know what they might do and how you can counteract them. Let your creativity flow and go ahead and pause the video here, and we'll take a few minutes for you to analyze, and we'll be right back. All right. So I hope you enjoyed that little bit of time, however long you took, and we're going to point out a few things that stood out to us. So, working from left to right, we've circled in magenta a handful of items that might be noticeable for you. Number one, there's a filing cabinet here. We don't know whether this is locked or not, but if there is data inside there, then someone could retrieve it by getting into that filing cabinet. We need to make sure it has a good secure lock. Next, underneath the door, going back to the video by Deviant Ollam, you could very easily slide something under that door and open the latch from the inside. Now, is that likely to happen simply to get some data? Probably not, but if I need to be aware, then I should be aware and block that under the door. Moving into the center at the bottom, we have a desk drawer. We don't know what's in that drawer, but if we look at it, we can notice that there is no lock there on the front. So that drawer might be unlocked. Again, we need to make sure that any drawers where sensitive data is kept are kept locked anytime that they are not being used. Moving up from there, I'm going to point out what looks like a handful of personal objects on the top of the desk. While not necessarily useful in stealing data, if my car keys or house key are there, someone could use those in order to pressure me and get me to do things they want. For instance, someone could who's extremely nefarious might take my key and hide in the back of my car until I'm off work and then threaten me to get data from me. Again, not likely, but we should make sure that keys are under our control at all times. Likewise, we want to make sure that we don't leave any documents out that have student information on them that might be noticed. Moving to the two circles there on the computer screens, this computer is currently in use and it's unlocked, and apparently it is accessing some sort of feed on the internet. So, right away, we have an unprotected computer logged into some system that is attached to the network here on campus. Now, maybe I have it set up so that there is no auto sign in for sensitive systems, such as our conduct database or our assessment database, but I shouldn't leave my computer unlocked. If the computer is not being used, it should be secured. Moving over to the right hand side a little bit further, next to the phone, you might have noticed a small photograph along with a small set of Funko Pop brand dolls. If you're into social engineering, you would be able to notice that I have a partner, and you'd be able to divine that we enjoy the Game of Thrones television series by looking at those. Using that, a nefarious person might be able to gain some trust by discussing Game of Thrones, or alternatively, they may threaten to harm my partner if I don't acquiesce to their requests for the sensitive data. And finally, up there in the upper right corner, we see the small silver circle of a lock for a cabinet. This is good that we have a lock for the cabinet. However, just like with the filing cabinet and the drawer, if the key is not secured or if it's easily available, then having the lock is simply a small deterrent not to stop anyone. If you want some more information and references, I highly encourage you to check out some of the links here on this page. Howard Payne and Devi Olam's 2016 video about keys is mind blowing for how well they discuss different keys and how they can get into different places using easily available keys from all over the internet that are completely legal to own as well. Deviant Olam's 2017 video about I'll Let Myself In Tactics of Physical Pen Testers is a fantastic watch if you are worried about people entering a space, not necessarily using a key. The underdoor tool assembled at Sans Orlando video is a clip showing how he was able to get under a door that was previously locked. All of the comics used in this clip have been from xkcd.com by Randall Monroe and are used under the Creative Commons license. Thank you, Randall. And then in terms of framing data security, Shu Bidich, Dean, and Kinsey's 2016 text is a fantastic source to be able to discuss data, data security, and assessment. If you have any questions or want to have us present this topic at your institution or your working group, or to make it so that it is more adjusted for your group, contact us at info@studentdevassociates.com, where we help you help students.